Hello, my friends. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and we are in the middle of a great big grand reset of the book of Matthew. Officially, we're in the middle of Matthew chapter 24 on our journey through this book, one little chunk at a time every weekday morning. But as I just alluded to, we are in the midst of a brief step back to look at the whole thing at once, because we want to be able to take this book and have all the raw materials of it spread out in front of us so we can think about all of it at once. And that requires us from time to time to reset things, both to help newcomers get up to speed and to keep it fresh in the minds of those of us who've been working on it a little bit longer. I'm glad you're all here. I'm going to have Jeff play some music, and we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. Here in chapter 10, we get the list of the disciples, and Jesus talks to them about what it's going to be like going out and telling people about him now for them, later on in their lives, and then what it's going to be like for anybody who goes and does this later on. Then in chapter 11, some time has passed, and Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist, his hype man, has been arrested, and he's in jail, and he's kind of wavering a little bit, and so he sends his own followers to Jesus, who's not in jail. It's like, hey, John the Baptist wanted to know if, like, you really are the one, right? Or maybe we should expect someone else. And then Jesus cites this really important passage that everybody would have known from Isaiah about what it'll look like when the Messiah comes. And it's a bunch of things about brokenness and people being fixed, and the deaf can hear, and leprosy's cured. And Jesus is, he's essentially saying, I'm the Messiah, but he hasn't come right out and said that yet. A bunch of other people are standing around. They're like, John the Baptist's disciples, so dumb. And then Jesus kind of turns on them a little bit. And it's like, no. Generally speaking, there's something of a faith problem and being on the same page with God problem amongst my people here in this land, and there has been for generations and generations. And then he pivots one more time, and he ends that rebuke saying, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Well, that doesn't do it for the Pharisees, because then at the beginning of chapter 12, they're like, we are mad about you guys eating grain on the Sabbath day. You're not supposed to do that. And that conversation between Jesus and the religious leaders does not go well. They decide they're probably going to need to kill him and start working on a plan to do so. So Jesus withdraws for a period of time, but is pursued by people who think he's the Messiah and want to see miraculous stuff, and he's pursued by the religious leadership. More tension ensues after that. Jesus' own family shows up to collect him. They're like, we heard about how this is going. Like, we're not even going to come in and listen to your speech. This is getting ugly. And Jesus is like, I'm not going out to talk to them right now, after he gets notified that they're sitting outside. He's like, you want to know who my mother and brothers are? It's whoever does the will of my Father in heaven. That's my brother and sister and mother. So as you can see, by the time we get to chapter 13, tensions are ratcheting up. Chapter 13 is the third of the great big speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured. It's a whole bunch of parables about the sneaky, unexpected ways that Jesus' kingdom is going to work out. This includes the famous parable of the sower, the farmer who goes out and he sows a whole bunch of seed on 4 different types of soil, and then it works out 4 different ways on those 4 different types of soil. At the end of 13, it looks like Jesus does go with his family back to their hometown, but nobody in his hometown is having it. And Jesus says, only in his hometown and his own house is a prophet without honor. And he moves on. After that, in chapter 14, we find out that John the Baptist has now been beheaded at like a sexy dance party. It sounded like it was really screwed up. Jesus hears about it in 14, is like, no, now I'm actually going to take a little bit of space. He and his disciples get in a boat and they go to a more solitary place, but the lake is not that big. They're at the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel where this has happened. So people are like, I can still see you. I can see your boat, right? Like, you're right there. It's just a lake. We're just going to follow you. And so they did. And then everybody follows him, but they didn't pack sack lunches. And now everybody's hungry. And Jesus teaches. And the disciples are like, what are we going to do? And Jesus is like, give them something to eat, because I'm the God of provision, and the values of the kingdom and the wealth of the kingdom is unending. And so miraculously, 5,000 men, in addition to a bunch of women and children, get fed. And then right after that, in chapter 14, Jesus is like, no, now actually I'm going to take a little time. Sends the disciples out in the boat. He goes off by himself, and then he can see that the waves are coming up, and he walks to them on the water. Peter even hops out of the boat and is able to do it for a second as well. I know it sounds nuts, but that's what the text says. And then Jesus rescues him. They get in the boat, and the disciples, their heads are spinning. They think they know who this guy is, but everybody's still kind of afraid to say it. In chapter 15, we just got done with amazing stuff, breaking the laws of time and space, beautiful, incredible, hope-inspiring stuff. But when they park the boat, the Pharisees are right there, and they're like, we got another thing we're mad about, and it's hand washing. Seems like you guys aren't washing your hands quite well enough, and we are super, super mad about it. It's like, oh, this move from the transcendent to the mundane just happens so quickly. And Jesus interacts with that. He does well, but again, it goes very poorly. And ultimately, Jesus takes his disciples on a big road trip way, way up north, even out of Jewish territory, where apparently he's building into their lives, knowing like, hey, these guys are going to kill me, and it's going to be up to you 12 to carry the baton forward when I'm gone. And so he's investing in them heavily. He has an encounter with a Gentile lady up there that indicates that the message of the values of the kingdom are not just for Jewish people, but it's for everybody, which is pretty exciting. Then somewhere out there after that, he feeds another gigantic crowd of people miraculously, which sort of completes a double metaphor from the feeding of the 5,000 and this later feeding of the 4,000 that surrounds that interaction with that Gentile lady to demonstrate that God's provision is for everybody and he has no limits on his ability to provide. And structurally, it's really one of the highlights, one of the very beautiful points that stand out to me in how Matthew has built his document. In 16, we get more difficult interactions with the Pharisees, where we're just being reminded they're always there, they're always looming, and they're always mad. And then finally, Jesus and the disciples have a minute to sit down. I picture them being like around a campfire or something. And Jesus is like, hey, who does everybody say that I am? Well, he calls himself the Son of Man. Who does everybody say the Son of Man is? And they give a bunch of answers that don't make a lot of sense. But Jesus is like, yeah, but what about you guys? And Peter finally says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, yep, that is correct. Paraphrase is mine. And on its surface, this just seems like a little campfire chat for what we all know because we have the benefit of 2,000 years of history. But this is a gigantic moment in the plot that this thing finally gets said out loud. You are the Messiah. You're the Son of God. I mean, it's just, it's blasphemy if he's wrong. The consequences if he's wrong would be huge. But we all know by this point in the text that he is right. Now Jesus follows that up not by saying, cool, and everything's going to be great from now on. And then everything turned green and mom and dad got back together and stuff was fine. No, he's like, I'm going to get killed. That's what's going to happen next. And Peter's like, no way. And Jesus is like, knock it off with that crap. No, I'm actually going to get killed. This is happening. And I'm going to get raised back to life, and you're not going to stop it from happening, Peter. So at this point, we go from one huge plot point in chapter 16 to another huge plot point. Jesus saying they are going to kill me. It is going to happen, but I'm going to come back to life and defeat death. Very next chapter, 17, Peter, James, and John, three of the most prominent disciples, go up on a mountain with Jesus. There, they see his glory, like part of his divine glory. God shows up, characters from the Old Testament. The disciples don't know what to do. They bumble, and it doesn't go particularly well, but they're trying. And then Jesus reiterates after this glorious moment, like, in spite of what you just saw, I'm going to get killed and I'm going to get raised back to life. And the disciples, of course, are having a ton of trouble picturing like what it's even going to be like without him. Like, how do we run things? What do we do? What kind of community will be left? And in chapter 18, the fourth of the 5 great big speeches around which the book of Matthew is organized, we get a whole explanation from Jesus about the basics of what it's going to be like when he's gone and how to do Christian relationships and Christian community with the values of the kingdom. And then that speech in Matthew chapter 18 gets interrupted by a question from Peter. He's like, how many times should I forgive? And Jesus is like, a lot. Like whatever a metaphor for a lot is, that's how much. Because forgiveness is the currency of the kingdom. It's the value of the kingdom. That'd be very different than what the religious values of the time were all about. We still got a good chunk of ground to cover on this reset. But think about it. Even with just the part that we've covered so far in these 2 conversations, you can already see that all 7 of those plots that we talked about yesterday, the 7 basic plots from all of storytelling, they're all here. This is so rich and so meaningful. And one of the things I think is most compelling about all of it is not just that it's great storytelling, but that it holds itself out as being more than storytelling. And wherever you ultimately end up landing on that claim, that's your thing. But it certainly ups the stakes and makes this whole exercise that much more interesting. We'll pick up where we left off tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.